Hey everyone, Rho here. Today we discuss the Mask of Leman Russ, how the Emperor is integral to the nature of the Wolf King. Spoiler warning to begin, as the events we are discussing today are from the Horus Heresy novel Wolf King by Chris Wraight. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself, without spoilers. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, the unique nature of the Primarchs has always been a big part of their appeal, how they all have their own unique personality and identity, a large part of those seemingly arising from the worlds they were raised on. The Grim Reaper that is Mortarion, the Seeker of Knowledge that is Magnus, and of course the Wolf King Leman Russ, for example. The truth is, however, at their core, they are all sons of terror, and the question has always been asked if the scattering was planned, allowed, or the Emperor just truly knew nothing about it. And well, we'll debate that question in depth another day. However, in researching our debate last week on whereabouts does Guilliman rank as a fighter, I stumbled upon a passage that really quite took me aback. Something I must have originally overlooked, or somehow just completely forgot about. Something that speaks to the very nature of Russ. Now, this takes place during the events of the Horus Heresy novel Wolf King by Chris Wraight, and it's set during the Battle of Alaxes, when the Alpha Legion have ambushed the Space Wolves after the events of Prospero. And there's a passage where we find Russ reflecting in his inner thoughts, very much about his past. How the Skjalds had told him it was a time of storms when he first arrived to Fenris. How it lit up the sky and caused seismic earthquakes. Now, Russ doesn't remember that. However, he does have vague recollections and dreams of being in his incubator within the Imperial Palace, hearing the noise of the machines and faint voices of people coming and going. And once his father arrived to Fenris and explained everything, he came to terms with the fact that Fenris was not the world of his birth. And this is where things begin to get really interesting, because Russ always somehow knew that everything around him felt wrong, that he could just so easily defeat every beast and man who lay before him. He felt like he just didn't belong. Like many of his brothers, he came to realize that his destiny simply lay elsewhere. And we get a tantalizing reference to his time upon Terra, the reunited father and son. It's only a very brief couple of lines, but we learn the Emperor actually kept him in isolation for a long time, teaching him the ways of the legions and how to use the warp awareness in his blood. And that for me is absolutely fascinating. We know most of the Primarchs went to Terra to spend time with their father once they had been reunited. But I've never heard of them being kept in isolation before. Of course, it could just be a way of describing the tutoring and learning that every Primarch has to go through. But I can't help thinking how, with Russ being only the second found after Horus, this was still a very important stage in the Great Crusade. After being alone with Horus for decades, he was most likely still wondering how many other Primarchs he would actually find. And side note, we're just disregarding the whole Alfarius thing for now, as we simply don't know what's true or not. But aside from the timing of Russ's finding, I think maybe this could be more a reflection upon his role, the Emperor knowing the Primarch he had found, his executioner. Keeping Russ in isolation, teaching him the ways of the legions, would certainly lean into that reasoning. But it's that reference to teaching him to use his warp awareness that definitely has me feeling this could be unique to Russ. I've always personally felt that Russ was made to be the anti-Psyker and anti-Chaos Primarch, as I've often said on the channel. Could this just be a hint to the Emperor teaching him to fulfill that role? For me, it is a definite possibility. Now it's after that we learn that Russ actually offered to leave Fenris, that he felt there was no way that it could support a legion, and that for me gives you the truest sense of the man beneath the mask that Russ is. It seems crazy. Russ and the Wolves are beyond tied to Fenris. They represent the very nature of the world. But there was in fact a time at the beginning that he felt Fenris would not be suitable to fulfill his duty to his father. And so Russ offered to leave it. And it's here we see how important the Emperor was in guiding Russ and his legion into becoming the Space Wolves they would go on to be, the Vilka Fenrika. The Emperor, as we know, declined Russ's offer, and we aren't party to their conversation or words, but it's clear the nature of Fenris was integral into crafting the Space Wolves Legion as the Emperor wanted them to be. And Russ did exactly what his father told him to do. He remained immersed within that nature, becoming more Fenrisian than the Fenrisians themselves. He stayed away and remained apart from his brothers, and that is an absolutely fascinating insight. There's a reference to him remaining out of the councils of Guilliman and the Lion, and ignoring emissaries sent by Lorgar. And so we know that he was remaining apart from his brothers because that's what his father instructed him to do. It really adds a new light onto the feeling I've always had as Russ seeing himself as somewhat the older brother, almost feeling a sense of responsibility for his brother's actions. And here we see it's not just the way Russ feels, but that in a large part he was instructed to do that by his father. From the very beginning of their reunion, the Emperor moulded Russ into performing the role he had created him to fulfill. As Russ himself reflects, to become the weapon of last resort, the most faithful, and the one who has to fight the dirty wars. When I think back to that scene at the beginning of the Horus Heresy novel Wolfsbane, and spoiler warning here, when we see the Emperor reuniting Horus with the newly found Russ, and just how happy the Emperor is, how proud he is of Russ's achievements in conquering half of Fenris, how he simply disregards Horus's jealous fears of Russ turning on him with a simple "he will not." It's really clearer than ever now that the Emperor knows what and who he has found. This is just why I love the lore. You can reread an old book or chapter you've read years before, and suddenly it just fires a whole new life or perspective onto something, just refiring that imagination. It's just another example of why you just can't beat the 40k universe. Russ would ultimately become Fenris itself. The mere notion of ever offering to leave something he can't believe he once uttered. But the truth is, we know this is something his father instructed him to become, to remain a part of, to use the fire and ice to forge his legion into the force he needed them to become his lord of winter and war. But as always, what do you think? Was finding Russ immersed upon Fenris merely the Emperor capitalizing on the situation, realizing the benefits of what he had found? Or is this more a sign of how Russ was always intended to grow there? How maybe the Emperor had some influence on the scattering? Is Russ maybe of all the Primarchs the clearest influence of two homeworlds, the effects of Fenris and the loyalties of Terra? And why do you feel the Emperor felt it's so important for Russ and his legion to be moulded on Fenris? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.